There was a night when the world held its breath, and in that suspended moment between one heartbeat and the next, something shifted in the fabric of our small village. I remember it clearly, the way the winter air tasted of copper and starlight, how the snow fell upward for just an instant before remembering its proper direction. Our village had always been a place where the impossible wore comfortable clothes, where roses bloomed defiantly in December snow, and the old clock tower sometimes forgot which way time was supposed to flow. But that particular night, as the moon slid across the sun's face like a gentle hand closing tired eyes, even we who were accustomed to small miracles felt the presence of something larger stirring. The bell in the tower, silent for 37 years, its voice lost to rust and sorrow, suddenly remembered how to sing. One clear, resonant note rolled across the snow-covered rooftops, just as Rowan drew their first breath in the small cottage near the crossroads. The midwife, whose weathered hands had welcomed 3 generations of village children into the world, paused in her work to listen to that impossible chime echoing through the eclipse-darkened streets. She had learned long ago to pay attention when the world offered signs, and this felt like the universe itself taking note of an arrival. "Some children are born to witness," she whispered to the new grandmother, Iris, who stood with soil still dark beneath her fingernails from her evening work in the garden. "And some are born to be witnessed. This little one. They'll do both." She wrapped the baby in a quilt that had been sewn by hands that understood love as a verb rather than a feeling, and in that first moment of swaddling, something shimmered in the air between them, barely visible like heat rising from summer pavement, but there nonetheless. Iris took her grandchild with the reverence of someone who had spent decades learning that the most precious things in life come wrapped in ordinary moments. She had been tending impossible things for so long that another small miracle felt like coming home. Her garden, visible through the frost-painted window, defied every law of botany the scholars could name. Roses the color of captured sunsets bloomed beside snow-heavy branches, their petals soft as whispered prayers. Cherry trees bore fruit in the depths of winter, their offerings sweet with the concentrated essence of stolen seasons. Night-blooming jasmine opened its stars to December moonlight, perfuming the air with the scent of summer dreams. The villagers had long whispered about Iris and her impossible garden, though never unkindly. They understood, in the way that small communities understand such things, that some people carry bargains with mystery itself. They had watched her tend plants that shouldn't exist with the same gentle devotion she brought to everything else. The way she always had an extra loaf of bread when someone was struggling. The way she knew exactly when to appear with a cup of tea and a listening ear. Her kindness had its own seasons, its own impossible blooms. As baby Rowan grew from sleeping bundle to curious infant, Iris began to notice something extraordinary about the way they looked at the world. While other babies focused on faces and bright colors, Rowan's dark eyes seemed to track movements that existed just beyond the edge of ordinary sight. They would lie in their cradle, tiny fingers reaching for something that wasn't there, or pause in the middle of nursing to stare with intense concentration at empty spaces above their grandmother's head. By the time Rowan could sit up on their own, their peculiar way of seeing had become more pronounced. They would clap their small hands at nothing visible, but always in the exact moments when Iris was thinking, loving thoughts about the neighbors who would receive her extra vegetables, when the village children scraped their knees and their mothers kissed the hurt away. Rowan would point to the space above the healing and whisper sounds that weren't quite words but felt like recognition. Iris began to understand that her grandchild had inherited something far more complex than her own gift for coaxing impossible flowers from willing soil. Where she could nurture beauty that defied natural law, Rowan could see the invisible architecture of love itself, the shimmering threads that connected every act of tenderness to its source, every sacrifice to its recipient, every moment of choosing kindness over convenience. These threads appeared to the child as streams of silver light, delicate as spider silk, but strong enough to hold the world together. They flowed from the baker's hands when she gave free bread to struggling families, creating luminous connections between her generosity and grateful hearts. They sparkled around the postman when he took extra time to chat with lonely elders, weaving nets of light that made ordinary Tuesday mornings look like celebrations. And they blazed brightest of all around Iris herself, especially when she worked in her impossible garden, silver streams flowing from her weathered hands into the soil, carrying pieces of her life force into the roots of beauty that shouldn't exist. The other village children sensed something different about Rowan and kept their distance. Not from cruelty, but from the instinctive awareness that some people carry more of the world's mystery than others can comfortably handle. Rowan didn't seem to mind the solitude. They were content to spend hours in Iris's garden, watching the silver threads that flowed between their grandmother and her impossible roses, learning without words that every beautiful thing requires a trade, and that the question is never whether we'll pay the price, but whether we'll pay it consciously, with love. As the seasons turned and Rowan grew from infant to toddler, their gift deepened and clarified. They learned to recognize the difference between the silver threads of willing sacrifice and the dark, tangled knots that formed when people gave grudgingly or kept score of their kindnesses. They developed their own quiet rituals around what they could see, sitting very still when someone nearby was making a loving choice, as if their attention was itself a form of witness that honored the sacrifice being made. The village began to change in subtle ways around Rowan's presence, though no one could have said exactly how or why. People found themselves more conscious of their small kindnesses, more aware of the moments when they chose generosity over self-protection. The threads of silver light multiplied and strengthened, creating an invisible web of connection that made the whole community feel somehow more alive, more present to the daily miracles of choosing love over fear. On quiet evenings, when the impossible roses glowed like captured moonlight, and the air hummed with the gentle magic of a place where love was made visible, Iris would hold Rowan in her lap and hum songs that sounded less like melodies and more like conversations with the universe itself. The child would watch the silver threads dance between them, understanding without words that they had been born into a world where every act of love left its mark on the air, where kindness created its own light, and where someone needed to witness these small miracles to make them real. And somewhere in the distance, patient as winter waiting for spring, a shop that belonged to no particular street prepared to borrow space from the world, its windows full of ordinary objects that carried extraordinary prices, waiting for the night when a heart would ask a question it had never asked before. The seasons turned like pages in a well-loved book, and with each turning, Rowan's peculiar sight grew clearer and more complex. By the time they had learned to tie their own shoes and help carry water to the impossible roses, the silver threads had become as familiar as breathing, but now they could see so much more. Not every strand of light was the same. Some pulsed with the steady rhythm of a mother's daily care, others sparkled briefly like coins thrown into a fountain, and the deepest ones hummed with the low, constant frequency of love that had been choosing the same heart for decades. But alongside the silver, Rowan began to notice something else entirely. When Mrs. Chen at the bakery sighed and charged the struggling widow full price for bread, a small dark knot appeared in the air between them, tight and heavy as a held breath. When the children at school whispered cruel things about old Mr. Torres and his limp, more knots formed, tangling around their words like thorns. These weren't evil things, Rowan understood instinctively, just the visible weight of moments when fear won over kindness. When people chose the smaller version of themselves, the knots felt different from the silver threads, where the light seemed to lift and connect. The dark tangles pulled inward, creating small pockets of heaviness that made the air itself feel tired. Rowan learned to sit very still when they appeared, breathing slowly and steadily, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes the knots would loosen slightly, as if patient witness was itself a form of gentle untangling. Grandmother Iris watched these developments with the quiet pride of someone who had been waiting her whole life to see such gifts unfold. She never questioned Rowan's long stares at empty air, or their habit of reaching toward spaces where nothing visible existed. Instead, she began teaching in the way she did everything else, through gentle example and stories that felt like lullabies learning to walk. "Every garden teaches the same lesson," she would say as they worked together among the impossible blooms, her weathered hands guiding Rowan's smaller ones. "Beautiful things grow from what we're willing to give away. The roses don't steal my years, I offer them freely, and they transform that gift into something the whole world can enjoy." As autumn deepened into winter, Rowan began to notice changes in the silver threads that flowed from their grandmother. Where once they had blazed with steady, abundant light, Now they flickered like candles in a draught. The threads were still there, still beautiful, but they carried a translucent quality that made Rowan's chest tighten with wordless understanding. Each impossible rose that bloomed in defiance of December, frost drew its sustenance, not just from soil and water, but from the luminous substance of Iris herself. The garden responded to its tender with sympathetic magic. The roses opened their petals more slowly now, as if trying to savor each drop of silver light they received. The winter cherries hung longer on their branches, reluctant to complete the cycle that cost their guardian so much. Even the night-blooming jasmine seemed to pace itself, offering fewer but more intensely fragrant blossoms, each one concentrated with the essence of sacrificial love. The village children, who had always sensed something different about Rowan, began to keep an even gentler distance. They couldn't see the threads or knots, but they could feel the weight of mystery that surrounded the quiet child, who spent hours sitting motionless in impossible gardens. Their parents too noticed the change, not just in Rowan, but in the very air around the cottage near the crossroads, which seemed to hum with the frequency of something precious slowly being used up. Rowan developed new rituals during this time, small ceremonies of attention that felt as necessary as breathing. They would position themselves where they could watch the silver threads flow between Iris and her beloved plants, their presence a form of witness that seemed to honor the exchange taking place. When the threads flickered with particular fragility, Rowan learned to sit very still and breathe deeply, as if their focused attention could somehow steady the connection between love and its visible manifestation. One evening, as the first real snow of winter began to fall in patterns that looked almost like writing against the darkening sky, Rowan found Iris sitting on their favorite bench, watching a single perfect rose unfurl its petals in deliberate defiance of the season. The silver thread connecting grandmother to flower was barely visible now. "Thin as spider silk and twice as precious, grandmother," Rowan whispered, climbing onto the bench beside her. "The silver threads around you, they're getting so thin." Iris smiled and wrapped her arm around her grandchild, and for a moment the threads brightened with the force of pure, unconditional love. "Ah, little one, so you truly see it all now. This sight of yours, it's both a gift and a burden, isn't it? You see how every beautiful thing asks for a piece of us in return." Rowan nodded solemnly, watching the way their grandmother's life force flowed like liquid starlight into the impossible blooms around them. "It means that loving things cost something real," they said with the gravity of someone much older. "And it means someone needs to witness it happening, to make sure it matters." The snow continued to fall around them, each flake catching and reflecting the gentle light of roses that bloomed in winter, tended by hands that understood the true mathematics of love and paid its price gladly, witnessed by eyes that could see the luminous cost of choosing beauty over safety, tenderness over self-preservation, and somewhere in the distance, patient as winter waiting for spring, a peculiar shop prepared to materialize at the crossroads, its windows full of ordinary objects that carried extraordinary prices, waiting for the night when a desperate heart would ask the universe a question it had never dared ask before. The night deepened around them like a gentle hand closing over a candle flame, and with it came the kind of silence that feels heavy with unspoken prayers. Iris's breathing had grown so shallow that Rowan found themselves holding their own breath in sympathy, as if they could somehow share the burden of drawing air into failing lungs. The silver threads that connected their grandmother to her impossible garden flickered like dying stars, each pulse weaker than the last, and Rowan understood, with the terrible clarity that comes to children, who love too deeply, that they were witnessing something irreversible unless the universe itself decided to intervene. The roses outside seemed to sense their tender's distress, their winter blooms growing translucent as tissue paper, their luminescence fed by the last precious drops of Iris's life force. Even the night-blooming jasmine had begun to close its star-shaped flowers, as if preparing for a darkness that would last longer than any ordinary night. The entire impossible garden held its breath, waiting for something that felt like both an ending and a beginning, though Rowan couldn't yet imagine what form such intervention might take. It was then, in that suspended moment between hope and despair, that something shifted at the village crossroads. Where four familiar streets had intersected for generations, a fifth path materialized like moonlight, learning to cast shadows. The new street stretched away into darkness that felt less like absence and more like infinite possibility, paved with stones that caught starlight and held it like captured dreams. At its end, a shop took shape with the patient deliberation of a flower blooming in reverse time, its windows filling with warm amber light that spilled onto the crystalline pavement like honey, poured from generous hands. Then building itself seemed to exist in several moments. Simultaneously, weathered wood that remembered, ancient forests wrapped around, windows that reflected not the street outside, but something deeper, more essential. Above the door, a simple sign materialized in letters that seemed to shift between languages depending on who was looking. Necessary things, it read. And somehow Rowan understood that this was both invitation and warning. Promise and price all woven together. The proprietor emerged from his shop like twilight, learning to walk upright, his form solidifying with each step until he resembled nothing more mysterious than a kindly librarian who had spent decades reading books about subjects that existed just beyond the edge of ordinary understanding. His hair held the deep blue-gray of evening sky. His eyes carried the patient depth of someone who had witnessed every possible variation of human love and loss, and his smile contained the gentle melancholy of someone who understood that the most precious gifts always came wrapped in difficult choices. Mr. Necessary, as he had been known for longer than the village had existed, walked slowly toward the cottage where Rowan sat vigil beside their fading grandmother. He moved with the unhurried grace of someone who understood that desperate moments required gentle handling, carrying with him the scent of old books and new possibilities, of bargains struck in starlight and promises kept across generations. When their eyes met through the frost-painted window, Rowan felt recognition pass between them, like a bridge built of shared understanding. This was the moment Iris had been preparing them for without words, the reason they had been born with eyes that could see the silver threads of love and sacrifice that connected all living things. "Grandmother," Rowan whispered, and Iris stirred, her gaze focusing with sudden clarity on the impossible figure waiting patiently in her impossible garden. "Ah," she breathed, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had been expecting this visitor for a very long time. "The merchant of necessary sorrows, he offers ways for love to continue when all ordinary paths have been exhausted, little one. But his gifts always teach us something we didn't know we needed to learn about the true cost of caring for others." The gentle knock that came at their door sounded like rainfall on spring leaves. Polite and patient and utterly inevitable, Rowan rose on trembling legs, understanding that their childhood, the simple time of learning to see love's visible mathematics, was about to transform into something far more complex and demanding and ultimately more beautiful than anything they had dared imagine. Mr. Necessary stood in their doorway like patience itself, his smile warm enough to melt winter, but gentle enough not to overwhelm a frightened child. "Good evening, Rowan," he said, and their name in his voice sounded like coming home. "You have a question that needs asking, and I have an answer that needs giving. Shall we sit together and speak of necessary things?" The silver threads around Iris pulsed once, faintly, like a heart remembering how to hope, and somewhere in the distance, the village clock tower prepared to chime an hour that existed only in the space between desperate love and impossible possibility, where children learned that some bargains were worth making, even when you couldn't yet understand their full price. The conversation that would change everything was about to begin, gentle as a lullaby and profound as the mathematics of stars choosing to shine in darkness, witnessed by roses that bloomed in winter and tended by hands that understood love as something you did rather than something you simply felt. The silence that followed Mr. Necessary's gentle knock stretched like a held breath, and in that pause, Rowan felt the weight of every choice they had ever witnessed crystallizing into this single moment. They opened the door to find him waiting with the patience of evening itself, his presence filling the doorway not with urgency, but with the quiet certainty of someone who understood that the most important conversations happened in whispers, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the gentle mathematics of love calculating its own price. He settled into Iris's favorite chair with the careful grace of someone who had learned to make himself at home in moments of profound transition, while Rowan perched on the edge of their seat like a small bird preparing for flight. The cottage seemed to exhale around them, the very walls leaning in to listen as Mr. Necessary began to speak in a voice that carried the warmth of candlelight and the depth of ancient understanding. "The exchange I offer is both simple and profound," he said, his words falling into the room like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that would reach far beyond this moment. "Your grandmother can live another decade, her body restored to the strength she possessed, before her impossible garden began drawing so heavily from her life force. The roses will continue to bloom in winter, the cherry trees will bear fruit in snow, and the night-blooming jasmine will fill the air with captured summer dreams." Rowan watched the silver threads connecting Iris to her beloved plants pulse weakly in the lamplight, understanding that this was the fulcrum upon which their entire world balanced. They could feel their grandmother's breathing growing shallower with each passing moment, could see the impossible roses beginning to close their petals in sympathetic preparation for a darkness that would last longer than any ordinary night. "But," Mr. Necessary continued, his voice carrying the gentle precision of someone who had offered such bargains across centuries and understood exactly how each word would settle in a desperate heart, "in exchange you will become something unprecedented. You will carry the weight of every loving sacrifice made within these village boundaries. Not the pain itself. You won't feel their heartaches or carry their sorrows as your own, but you will know with absolute clarity the true cost of every act of love that happens around you." The explanation unfolded like a flower blooming in reverse time, each petal of understanding revealing deeper layers of meaning. Rowan would become witness to the hidden mathematics of tenderness. Every sleepless night, a parent spent worrying over their child, every friend who chose loyalty over convenience, every small kindness that required someone to give up something they wanted for themselves. The gift would manifest not as burden, but as privilege, the honor of seeing and honoring humanity's persistent choice to care for one another despite the cost. "Will it hurt?" Rowan asked, though they already suspected that the question missed something essential about what was being offered. Mr. Necessary smiled with the patience of someone who had been asked this question in countless variations across the ages. "It will feel like carrying a library in your heart," he said. "Heavy, yes, but also full of the most beautiful stories ever written. You'll understand why people choose love even when it costs them everything. And that understanding will change how you move through the world." Iris stirred in her bed, her breathing so shallow it barely lifted the quilt that covered her frail form, and Rowan felt the decision crystallize in their chest, like water freezing into perfect, inevitable patterns. They thought of all the silver threads they had witnessed over the years, all the moments when people chose kindness over comfort, generosity over safety. Someone needed to see these sacrifices, to honor them, to make sure they mattered in the vast accounting of human choices. "I accept," Rowan whispered, and the words felt like stepping through a doorway into a larger room, one with windows that looked out onto vistas they had never imagined possible. The ritual that sealed their agreement was as simple as it was profound. Mr. Necessary reached for the teacup resting on the table beside Iris's bed, lifting it toward the lamplight until the porcelain seemed to glow from within. "Then we agree," he murmured, and as he spoke the liquid in the cup began to shimmer with the same silver light that flowed through the threads of witnessed love. He offered it first to Rowan, who drank deeply, tasting starlight and sacrifice and the salt of tears shed in joy rather than sorrow. Then to Iris, whose eyes fluttered open just long enough to drink her portion, with the gratitude of someone whose most desperate prayer was being answered in ways that exceeded all hoping. The change happened gradually, like dawn arriving in slow degrees, rather than sudden illumination. Rowan felt their awareness expand beyond the cottage walls, beyond their own small circle of concern, until they could sense the loving choices being made throughout the village, like distant bells chiming in harmony. The sensation was overwhelming at first, a constant symphony of human connection, a tapestry woven from countless small sacrifices that kept the world soft and livable. Mrs. Chen at the bakery, deciding to slip an extra roll into the bag of bread for the struggling young mother, her choice creating a silver thread that hummed like a tuning fork in Rowan's chest. Mr. Henderson, the postman, walking an extra mile to deliver a letter to lonely Mrs. Peterson at the edge of the woods, his sacrifice resonating with the patient depth of someone who understood that connection was worth any amount of personal discomfort. Miss Albright, the teacher, staying late to help a struggling student trace letters across a page. Her dedication blazing with the quiet triumph of a mind beginning to grasp something new. Each thread, each act of giving, each choice to put another's well-being before one's own, struck Rowan like a clear, sweet note on an invisible bell. It was not pain but privilege, the honor of witnessing humanity's daily heroism, the ordinary miracles of people choosing tenderness over selfishness, in moments when no one was watching, when no reward was expected, when love was simply the right thing to do. The transformation in Iris was immediate and miraculous. Color returned to her cheeks like spring arriving early. Her breathing deepened and steadied, and the silver threads connecting her to her impossible garden blazed with renewed vitality. She sat up in bed with the fluid grace of someone whose body had remembered how to be strong, and when she smiled at Rowan, her eyes held the deep contentment of someone whose most precious gift had been preserved at exactly the right price. "My dear child," she whispered, reaching for Rowan with hands that no longer trembled, "you have chosen to become something beautiful and necessary. You will carry the weight of witnessed love, and that weight will make you strong in ways you cannot yet imagine." Outside, the impossible roses burst into bloom with such sudden abundance that their perfume filled the entire village, and people emerged from their houses to stand in wondering silence beneath the star-filled sky. Breathing in the scent of love made visible, sacrifice transformed into beauty, and the promise that someone, somewhere, was paying attention to every tender choice they made in the darkness, honoring it, holding it, making sure it mattered in the endless story of human hearts, choosing each other again and again. The bargain was complete, the price willingly paid, and Rowan's true education in the mathematics of love was about to begin. One witnessed sacrifice at a time, one silver thread connecting heart to heart in the gentle web that held the world together. The days that followed the bargain settled into Rowan's bones like a new season learning its rhythms, each sunrise bringing deeper layers of understanding about the weight they now carried. The expanded awareness felt like becoming a living instrument that resonated with every act of tenderness within the village boundaries. And Rowan spent their early adolescence learning to distinguish between the different melodies of love that played constantly around them. They discovered that the silver threads spoke in subtle dialects, each type of sacrifice creating its own unique frequency in the symphony of witnessed love. A parent considering extra shifts to afford their child's music lessons would generate threads that pulsed with steady determination, tinged with the gentle melancholy of personal dreams temporarily set aside. A friend preparing to sacrifice their own opportunity to care for aging relatives would emit threads that shimmered with both profound love and a kind of luminous acceptance, beautiful in their willing surrender to something larger than individual desire. The most remarkable discovery was that Rowan could sense these choices before they were fully formed in the minds of the choosers. They would feel a subtle stirring in their chest, a warm anticipation that meant someone nearby was standing at the crossroads between self-interest and selflessness, preparing to choose the harder path because it led toward tenderness. In these moments, Rowan learned to position themselves where they could offer silent witness to the decision, their presence somehow making the choice feel more significant, more honored, more worthy of the courage it required. Mrs. Kowalski's decision to use her last $20 not for the arthritis medicine she desperately needed, but for groceries to cook dinner for her recently widowed neighbor, blazed in Rowan's awareness like a small sun. They felt not just the immediate sacrifice, but its ripples, how the gesture reminded the grieving woman that she was still worth caring for, that her sorrow was witnessed and honored, that the world still contained people who would choose her comfort over their own convenience. Each witnessed act added another precious stone to the growing collection in Rowan's heart, making them not heavier but somehow more substantial, more deeply rooted in understanding what it meant to be human. But learning to carry such awareness came with its own gentle stumbles. The first time young Tommy Martinez struggled with his mathematics homework, while his sister Maria chose to help him, instead of meeting friends at the park, Rowan felt overwhelmed by the blazing beauty of the silver thread connecting sister to brother. They had to sit down on a nearby bench, tears streaming down their face, not from sadness, but from the sheer intensity of witnessing love choose patience over pleasure, responsibility over recreation, Grandmother Iris found them there, gently overwhelmed by the weight of witnessed tenderness, and taught them their first ritual of rest. "Witness is where love puts down its suitcase," she said, rubbing a few drops of rosemary oil into Rowan's palms. "You are not a ladder for others to climb, little one. You are a lantern. Shine where you stand and people will find their own steps." The words settled like a soft blanket over Rowan's shoulders, warm without weight, and they began to understand that their role was not to carry others' burdens, but to honor them, to make sure they mattered in the vast accounting of human choices. As the seasons turned, Rowan began to notice something extraordinary happening throughout the village. Their presence seemed to create subtle changes in the people around them, though no one could have articulated exactly what had shifted. People found themselves more conscious of their choices when Rowan was nearby, more aware of the moments when they could choose kindness over convenience. It was as if having their love witnessed gave them permission to love more boldly, more openly, more generously than they had dared before. Old Mr. Chen at the bakery began staying later to help struggling customers, his choice to put compassion before profit, creating threads of connection that strengthened the entire community's web of care. Miss Albright at the school started offering evening tutoring sessions, her dedication blazing with silver light that Rowan absorbed like a flower turning toward the sun. Even the teenagers, usually absorbed in their own discoveries and dramas, began to notice when their friends needed support. Their awkward attempts at comfort, creating silver threads that pulsed with the particular sweetness of love, learning to express itself. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but rather like watching a garden slowly come into fuller bloom. Each sacrifice Rowan witnessed and honored seemed to encourage others, creating a gentle spiral of increasing generosity that changed the village's emotional climate from the inside out. The silver threads multiplied and strengthened, weaving an increasingly complex web of connection that made the whole community feel somehow more alive, more present to the daily miracles of choosing love over fear. During this time of growth and learning, Rowan discovered the village library's back room, where dust motes moved like patient constellations in slanted afternoon light. Someone quiet and careful always kept a small lamp burning there, and Rowan found that the sound of pages turning had the same soothing cadence as their own breath when it was steady. They began leaving small notes on the reading table. "You can rest here." No explanations needed. People started coming. An apprentice shoemaker with sore hands, a mother who missed her old life, a girl who was afraid of the dark. They would sit in comfortable silence, breathe deeply and leave lighter than they came. The library became more than a sanctuary. It became a place where the weight of witnessed love could settle into deeper understanding. Rowan would sit among the books, feeling the day's collection of silver threads pulse gently in their chest, learning that each act of tenderness was not just an isolated moment, but part of an endless story of hearts choosing each other across the darkness. They began to understand that carrying the burden of witnessed sacrifice was not about enduring something difficult, but about becoming someone capable of holding the full spectrum of human tenderness without breaking. As autumn deepened into winter, Rowan stood at the library's threshold one evening and felt a change in the air like the first faint breeze before rain. It wasn't danger but possibility, a new note preparing to join the familiar symphony. Inside they could hear the soft scrape of a chair and a voice, low, steady, book-scented, asking if the lamp should stay lit a little longer for whoever might need it. Rowan smiled at the silver threads gathering in the lamplight, patient and bright, understanding that their work was like the tide itself, always preparing to meet new shores, always ready to witness whatever form love would choose to take next. The impossible roses outside glowed in the winter darkness, tended by Iris's restored hands, and somewhere in the gentle mathematics of love that governed their small world, new equations were preparing to reveal themselves, new ways of understanding that choosing tenderness, even when it costs everything, was not just the most human thing they could do, it was the most necessary, the most beautiful, the most worthy of witness in a universe that depended on such choices to hold itself together with threads of silver. Light, the voice that had been asking about the lamp, belonged to someone who moved through the library like a gentle current, their presence creating small eddies of calm wherever they passed. Rowan stepped into the back room to find a person about their own age carefully arranging books, with the reverent attention of someone who understood that stories were living things that deserved tender handling. Their hair caught the lamplight like captured twilight, and when they looked up, their eyes held the particular depth of people who had learned to listen with more than their ears. "You're the one who leaves the notes," they said, and their voice carried the soft rustle of pages turning, book-scented and unhurried. "About resting here. I'm Sage. I've been keeping the lamp burning longer, hoping whoever needed those words might find their way back." Rowan felt something shift in their chest, not the familiar resonance of witnessed sacrifice, but something newer and more personal. The silver threads of their own heart began to recognize another soul that understood the mathematics of gentle attention without requiring explanation or translation. They settled into the chair across from Sage, and the silence that followed felt not empty, but expectant, pregnant with the possibility of friendship that wouldn't demand constant justification of the unusual. "I can feel when people are carrying more than they can hold," Rowan said eventually, testing these new waters with words that felt both vulnerable and necessary. "This room seems to help somehow, like the weight becomes more manageable when it's shared with the books." Sage nodded, with the immediate understanding of someone who had been waiting their entire life for this particular conversation. "Stories hold space for feelings that don't fit anywhere else," they replied, gesturing toward the shelves that surrounded them like gentle guardians. "I think people come here when they need to remember they're not the first to feel whatever they're feeling." The friendship that began to grow between them unfolded with the natural ease of rivers finding their way to the sea. Sage didn't question Rowan's sometimes distant expressions, the way they would pause mid-conversation to acknowledge something invisible happening in the space around them. Instead, they learned to wait patiently during these moments, offering warm tea or adjusting the lamplight, understanding instinctively that some people carried more of the world's attention than others. Together, they transformed the library's back room into something that felt less like a hiding place and more like a sanctuary. Sage brought cushions sewn by hands that understood comfort as practical magic, while Rowan contributed small cuttings from Iris's impossible garden, plants that bloomed out of season and filled the air with the gentle perfume of love made visible. They created a space where the silver threads of witnessed sacrifice could settle into something deeper than individual. Moments of kindness. Rowan discovered that Sage's presence somehow softened the overwhelming nature of their gift, where the constant symphony of witnessed love could sometimes feel like standing too close to a waterfall. Sage's calm demeanor acted like a gentle buffer, allowing Rowan to process the intricate patterns of silver threads with greater ease and less emotional fatigue. Their friendship became a form of grounding, a reminder that even the most profound truths could be held with a quiet heart. Sage possessed their own subtle gift, an intuitive understanding of which books to recommend to people carrying specific burdens, which stories might help someone feel less alone in their particular struggle with choosing love over convenience. Their recommendations weren't based on literary merit, but on a deeper recognition of what each heart needed to hear in order to find courage to keep choosing kindness. The changes in their sanctuary reflected the changes happening throughout the village. People began arriving not just with their own burdens, but with stories of kindness they had witnessed elsewhere. A neighbor sharing their last candle during a power outage, a stranger helping carry groceries, a child giving up allowance money for flowers for a sad teacher. These shared stories created their own silver threads, connecting acts of witnessed love in an ever-expanding web of attention and care. The baker began leaving day-old bread outside her shop, with a sign reading, "For whoever needs it." The postman started carrying extra stamps for people who couldn't afford them. Even the teenagers began noticing when friends needed support. Their awkward attempts at comfort, creating silver threads that pulsed, with the particular sweetness of love learning to express itself. The partnership between Rowan and Sage felt like two instruments learning to play in harmony, each one's gifts amplifying the other's. Rowan could witness and honor the silver threads of sacrifice, while Sage created conditions where such sacrifices felt not like isolated heroism, but like part of a larger conversation about what it meant to be human in a world requiring constant choosing between self and other. As winter deepened and the impossible roses continued blooming in defiance of season, their sanctuary became a place where the village's growing capacity for love could gather and strengthen. The silver threads that Rowan witnessed throughout the community seemed to converge in their quiet back room, creating a concentration of witness tenderness that charged the very air with possibility. One evening, as they sat surrounded by the gentle glow of lamplight and the soft rustle of turning pages, Sage looked up from mending a book's torn spine and smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found their place in the world's larger story. "Thank you," they whispered, "for showing me that witness is its own form of love." Outside, Iris hummed in her impossible garden, her restored hands tending roses that bloomed because someone, somewhere, was paying attention to every tender choice made in the darkness, honoring it, holding it, making sure it mattered in the endless story of hearts choosing each other across the gentle mathematics of love. The 10th year of borrowed time settled around Grandmother Iris like a gentle luminescence, transforming her presence in ways that only someone with Rowan's particular sight could fully appreciate. The silver threads that flowed from her hands into the impossible garden still blazed with steady devotion, but they carried now a translucent quality that reminded Rowan of morning mist just before it lifts, beautiful and present, but somehow preparing for transformation. Iris herself seemed more concentrated, as if the decade of restored life had distilled her essence into something approaching pure love made visible. She began calling Rowan to the garden at dawn, when the snow still wore its soft blue and the air held the hush of unsaid things. They would stand together among roses beaded with frost, and Iris would guide Rowan's hands over the pruning shears, showing where to cut, not for punishment, but for encouragement. "Listen with your palms," she would murmur, her voice carrying the patient wisdom of someone who had learned to speak the language of growing things. "A branch will tell you where it wants to be lighter. We don't force bloom. We invite it." The teachings arrived in small sips rather than lectures, like warm tea poured steadily into a chilled cup. They would share sandwiches on their favorite bench, the kind with buttered bread and thin slices of radish that made a soft, peppered crunch, and Iris would watch the steam from their thermos drift like a tame cloud, while choosing her words with the care of someone who understood that some truths required gentle handling. "What you carry," she said one afternoon, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup, "isn't a burden to be endured. It's a language to be spoken gently. You will want to rescue everyone from the price of love. You mustn't. People need to pay their own coins, or the meaning won't take root." Rowan nodded, tasting salt and butter on their tongue, feeling the familiar choir of silver threads respond to Iris's clarity. "How do I know when to witness quietly and when to offer comfort?" they asked, understanding that both stillness and action could be forms of care. "You'll feel it," Iris replied, tapping 2 fingers lightly against Rowan's wrist, right where a pulse declared its steady faith. Faithful silence has its own warmth. Interference born from fear carries a chill, even when it wears kindness's coat. Practice noticing the temperature of your intentions. As autumn deepened and the impossible roses continued their defiant blooming, Iris began teaching Rowan the deeper mysteries that connected their gifts across generations. One evening, as twilight lingered longer than it should and the air hummed with the frequency of secrets preparing to reveal themselves, she called Rowan to sit beside her in the garden, where so many quiet conversations had shaped their understanding of love's true mathematics. "My dear child," Iris began, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had learned to speak truth without causing unnecessary pain, "there are things about our family's relationship with love and sacrifice that you need to understand. I was not always a gardener of impossible things." The story unfolded like a flower blooming in reverse time, each petal of revelation showing deeper layers of meaning. Long before Rowan was born, when Iris was young and desperate and facing the loss of everything she loved, she had carried a different kind of longing. She had wished for children, for a family to nurture, but the universe had woven different patterns into her life's tapestry. "It was then that Mr. Necessary appeared to me, much as he did to you," she continued, her words settling between them like stones dropped into still water. "He saw the depth of my desire to nurture, to bring life and beauty into the world, even if it could not be in the way I had first imagined. He offered me a different path, a different kind of creation." The bargain she had made echoed through the years with the same gentle precision that governed all of Mr. Necessary's exchanges. Iris had traded her ability to bear children for the power to grow impossible things, to coax life from barren ground, to make beauty bloom where only frost should lie, to create a garden that could feed not just bodies, but souls hungry for proof that love could manifest as visible miracle. "I thought at the time that I was giving up my chance at motherhood," she explained, her gaze sweeping across the vibrant out-of-season blooms that surrounded them. "But the universe had different mathematics in mind. My impossible garden became a beacon for hearts that needed tending, and eventually, it drew you to me." Rowan felt the pieces of their life's puzzle settling into their proper places, understanding now that their arrival during the eclipse had been not coincidence but completion, the universe's way of ensuring that Iris's sacrifice would bloom into something even more beautiful than she had dared imagine. They were not connected by blood but by something deeper, the recognition of kindred spirits called to carry love's weight in their own unique ways. "Your gift, my dear one," Iris continued, her voice now carrying the weight of generations of wisdom, "is to see the visible proof of these choices. The silver threads are not merely burdens to be carried. They are the shimmering testament to humanity's persistent courage, the evidence that despite all the world's shadows, people choose tenderness over selfishness more often than not." She reached for Rowan's hands, her touch warm and steady, despite the translucent quality of the silver threads that flowed from her toward the impossible blooms. "Each generation must learn to carry love's weight differently. Mine was to grow beauty from sacrifice. Yours is to witness and honor the beauty that others grow from their own selfless choices. And in witnessing, you make those choices matter even more." The impossible roses seemed to pulse with deeper luminescence as Iris spoke, as if the garden itself was responding to the truth being revealed. Rowan understood now that their education in the mathematics of love was part of an ancient conversation between generations, each one learning to transform sacrifice into something that served not just themselves, but the endless human story of hearts choosing each other across darkness. Sage appeared at the garden gate as evening deepened, stepping into their sanctuary with the same care they used to turn a fragile page. Iris welcomed them with a slice of warm bread and the quiet satisfaction of someone who recognized another soul capable of understanding. That witness was its own form of love. "Keep company with those who help. Your heart breathe evenly," Iris said, watching the silver threads curl around all three of them like gentle punctuation marks in the ongoing sentence of their shared understanding. As the night settled around them like a soft blanket, filled with the perfume of roses that bloomed because someone was willing to pay their price, Rowan felt the profound privilege of their role settling into their bones like a new season learning its rhythms. They were part of something larger than any individual life, a continuous story of love choosing to manifest as visible miracle, witnessed and honored and passed down through the patient alchemy of sacrifice, transformed into grateful acceptance. The village clock prepared to chime an hour that existed only in the space between one generation's understanding and the next's, readiness to receive what had been learned through decades of choosing love over safety, beauty over convenience, and the hard-won wisdom that some gifts could only be passed down through the gentle mathematics of witness sacrifice becoming willing inheritance. The teachings Iris had shared in her impossible garden began to bloom in ways that reached far beyond the cottage walls, spreading through the village like morning light, touching each window in turn. The changes came not as dramatic transformations, but as gentle adjustments in the daily rhythm of choosing kindness over convenience, and Rowan felt each shift like a new note, joining the familiar symphony of silver threads that had become the soundtrack of their days. Mrs. Chen, at the bakery, found herself unable to meet the eyes of the young mother who counted coins with careful fingers, and instead of charging full price, she began rounding down, then leaving day-old pastries on the community board with notes that read simply, "For whoever needs sweetness today." The silver thread that connected her small sacrifice to grateful hearts blazed so brightly that Rowan, passing by the shop window, had to pause and breathe deeply, overwhelmed by the beauty of generosity, choosing to multiply itself. The postman, Mr. Henderson, whose daily rounds had always given him intimate knowledge of the village's quiet struggles, began carrying extra stamps in his pocket and writing small encouragements on envelopes. "You matter. Keep going." Someone is thinking of you today. These additions to his routine created silver threads that stretched across miles, connecting isolated hearts to the larger web of care that was slowly but steadily strengthening throughout the community. Even the teenagers, usually absorbed in their own complex social negotiations, began to notice when their friends needed support. Sarah Martinez started bringing extra sandwiches to school, after seeing how Tommy tried to hide his empty lunch bag, and the silver thread connecting her sacrifice to his relief, pulsed with the particular sweetness of young love learning to express itself through practical kindness. But perhaps the most profound change came through Ilara and Finn, a gentle couple who had long wished for children but found themselves facing doors that remained closed despite their patient hoping. They had watched many children pass through the village, some with bright, eager eyes, others carrying a quiet sadness that lingered like morning fog waiting for sun. For months, their conversations had been filled with silver threads that flickered with uncertainty, their love seeking a form it could take that would matter in the world. One autumn morning, they found themselves drawn to little Kale, who always sat alone during playtime, tracing patterns in the dirt, with the focused attention of someone creating private worlds. No one had truly seen Kale, whose eyes held wisdom beyond his years, but whose spirit had grown quiet from neglect. As Ilara and Finn watched him from across the schoolyard, something crystallized between them, not a decision made from desperation, but a recognition of love finding its proper destination. Rowan, sitting on a nearby bench with a book they weren't really reading, felt the silver threads around the couple blaze with sudden, unwavering light, connecting them not just to Kale but to the very idea of expansive, unconditional love. Within weeks, the village watched with quiet approval as Kyle found himself with a new family, and the adoption seemed to give others permission to consider their own capacity for such transformative tenderness. The village council, typically concerned with mundane matters of budgets and road repairs, found themselves unexpectedly inspired by Mr. Henderson's proposal for a communal garden, a space where those without their own plots could grow food and flowers, where neighbors could share seeds and stories. Sage, attending the meeting as the library's representative, set a bowl of winter cherries from Iris's impossible garden at the center of the table and spoke in their characteristic whisper, "Some people don't have soil but still need things to grow." The idea took root immediately, not because of eloquent arguments, but because of the quiet recognition that such a space would serve needs no one had known how to articulate. Rowan, watching from the back of the room, saw silver threads bloom around each council member as they voted unanimously, their individual agreements weaving together into a collective tapestry of shared purpose. The library's back room continued to evolve as a sanctuary. But now people came not just with individual burdens, but with stories of kindness they had witnessed elsewhere. A neighbor sharing their last candle during a power outage, a stranger helping carry groceries, a child giving up allowance money for flowers for a sad teacher. These shared stories created their own silver threads, connecting acts of witnessed love in an ever-expanding web of attention and care. Rowan learned during this time the delicate art of witnessing without arranging, of being present to love's choices without trying to direct their outcomes. They developed small rituals of availability, sitting where they could see but not intrude, offering simple phrases like "you're allowed to rest" or "I see how much you're carrying," understanding that sometimes the most profound gift was simply the knowledge that someone was paying attention. The impossible roses in Iris's garden responded to the village's growing capacity for love by blooming with even greater abundance, their petals seeming to catch and hold the silver light of all the witnessed sacrifices that surrounded them. The air itself felt different now, charged with the gentle energy of a community, learning to love more boldly because someone was there to honor each choice, to make sure it mattered in the vast accounting of human tenderness. As winter deepened and the communal garden took shape in careful planning sessions held in warm kitchens, Rowan stood one evening at the village crossroads and felt a deep hum beneath the cobblestones. Not urgency but readiness, like a page preparing to turn itself toward whatever new chapter of witnessed love was waiting to unfold in the patient mathematics of hearts choosing each other across the darkness. The hum beneath the cobblestones had grown stronger in the weeks, leading to Rowan's 25th birthday, like a distant choir keeping time for something significant preparing to unfold. The village had settled into its new rhythms of witnessed kindness. Mrs. Chen's rounded down prices, Mr. Henderson's extra miles, the communal garden taking shape in careful conversations, held over warm tea, and Rowan moved through these familiar patterns with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had learned to recognize their place in love's larger mathematics. On the evening of their birthday, as autumn painted the world in shades of burnished copper, and the impossible roses glowed with defiant winter luminescence, Rowan felt the familiar shift in the air that meant the universe was about to offer another lesson in the patient algebra of hearts choosing each other across darkness. The silver threads throughout the village pulsed with particular brightness, as if the entire community was unconsciously preparing for whatever transformation was about to reveal itself. The fifth road materialized at the crossroads with the same gentle inevitability as morning light, its crystalline stones catching starlight and holding it like captured dreams. At its end, the shop of necessary things breathed into being, its amber windows spilling warmth onto the pavement like honey poured from generous hands. Mr. Necessary stood in the doorway, unchanged by the passing years, yet somehow carrying more dawn in his twilight eyes, his presence radiating the quiet satisfaction of someone whose carefully planted seeds had bloomed exactly as intended. "Good evening." "Rowan," he said, his voice carrying the same warmth of recognition mixed with something deeper, perhaps pride, or the gentle approval of a teacher watching a student graduate into wisdom. "You have grown into your gift with remarkable grace. The village thrums with witnessed love in ways that would have been impossible without your patient attention to its silver mathematics." They settled into the familiar chairs, the shop around them feeling less vast and mysterious than it had 13 years ago, more like a comfortable library where important conversations naturally occurred. The tea that appeared between them smelled of rosemary and rain on warm stones, and Rowan found themselves completely at peace, understanding that this moment was not crisis but completion, not ending but transformation into something even more beautiful. "I have come to offer you another choice," Mr. Necessary continued, his words falling into the room like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that would reach far beyond this moment. "You have fulfilled our original bargain beautifully, carrying the weight of witnessed sacrifice with such grace that it has become privilege rather than burden. But now you stand at another crossroads. I can remove this awareness, let you live unburdened by the constant symphony of others' loving choices. You could marry Sage, tend a simple garden, raise children who see only what ordinary eyes can see." The offer hung in the air like morning mist, beautiful and tempting in its simplicity. Rowan could imagine such a life. Quiet mornings with newspapers and tea, evenings spent reading stories that belonged to other people, nights uninterrupted by the gentle chiming of silver threads, as neighbors chose kindness over convenience. It would be peaceful in ways their current existence could never be. "The price," Mr. Necessary added with gentle precision, "would be your memories of being unconditionally loved by Grandmother Iris, not the facts of your relationship. You would remember living with her, learning from her, being cared for by her, but the feeling of being cherished without condition, the bone-deep knowledge that you were precious simply because you existed, that would become as distant as a half-remembered dream. The true nature of the test revealed itself like a flower blooming in reverse time, each petal of understanding showing deeper layers of meaning. This was not temptation, but invitation to demonstrate what 13 years of witnessing love's true cost had taught about the difference between burden and privilege, between weight that crushes and weight that strengthens. Rowan thought of all the silver threads they had witnessed over the years, each sacrifice made more meaningful by being seen, honored, held in the careful attention of someone who understood its true value. They thought of Iris's teachings in the impossible garden, her patient lessons about how beautiful things grew from what we were willing to give away, how witness was where love put down its suitcase and made itself at home. "I understand what you're offering," Rowan said slowly, their voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned to speak from deep wells of experience. "But the memories of being loved by Grandmother Iris aren't separate from my ability to witness others' sacrifices. They're what give me the strength to honor those sacrifices without being overwhelmed by them. They're what taught me that carrying love's weight is not suffering, but service, not burden, but the most beautiful privilege imaginable. They paused, feeling the silver threads of their own heart pulse with absolute clarity. If I gave you that warmth, I would still know the facts of her love, but I would lose what makes witness possible, the felt knowledge of what it means to be cherished. That feeling is what keeps the threads from becoming mere numbers, what steadies me when the music is loud, what teaches me to witness without arranging. Mr. Necessary smiled with the deep satisfaction of someone whose student had not just learned the lesson, but understood its deeper implications. And what do you choose, Rowan, who sees the silver mathematics of love? I choose to keep both, Rowan replied, understanding that this moment was not ending but evolution. I choose to carry the memories of being cherished and the privilege of witnessing others choose love over convenience. They belong together, like roots and branches of the same tree, like the hum beneath the cobblestones and the music it keeps time for. That the conversation that followed felt less like negotiation and more like recognition, two entities who had been part of the same story acknowledging their respective roles in love's ongoing education. Mr. Necessary revealed himself not as the devil of old stories, but as something far older and kinder, the part of the universe that ensured love always cost exactly what each heart could afford to give. No more and no less. He showed Rowan a vision that took their breath away, the vast web of silver threads stretching across not just their village, but the entire world, connecting every act of love to every other, creating a net of tenderness that held existence itself together. Their lifetime of witnessing had strengthened this web immeasurably, and their choice to continue would ripple forward through generations yet to come. Your gift will deepen now, Mr. Necessary explained, his voice carrying the warmth of evening light. You will begin to see not just individual threads, but the patterns they weave together, the way small sacrifices create larger tapestries of connection, and others will begin to develop their own forms of sight, inspired by your example of what it means to witness love with patient attention. As Rowan walked back through the village, the autumn air rich with wood smoke and the promise of winter's approach, they felt the profound privilege of their choice settling into their bones like a new season, learning its rhythms. The silver threads hummed with deeper resonance now, and somewhere in the impossible garden, Iris smiled in her sleep, dreaming of roses that bloomed because someone, somewhere, had chosen to carry love's beautiful weight rather than set it down, had chosen to remain awake to tenderness rather than sleep through its music. The hum beneath the cobblestones settled back into its patient rhythm, and Rowan understood that their education in love's mathematics was not ending but expanding, preparing to include new lessons about how witness could become celebration, how carrying love's weight could transform not just the carrier, but everyone whose sacrifices were honored by such faithful, grateful attention. The deepening of Rowan's gift revealed itself like morning light touching familiar rooms, showing details that had always been there but never quite seen with such clarity. Where once they had witnessed individual silver threads connecting acts of love to grateful hearts, now they began to perceive the magnificent patterns these threads wove together, constellations of kindness that created their own gentle gravity, drawing more tenderness into their luminous orbits. The village had become a living tapestry of witnessed love, and Rowan could see not just the individual stitches, but the beautiful design they created when woven together. Sage noticed the change first, in the way Rowan would pause during their evening walks through the village and smile at something invisible, but clearly wonderful. You're seeing more now, aren't you? They asked one quiet evening as they sat together in their sanctuary among the books, lamplight catching the gentle wonder in Rowan's eyes. The threads are connecting into something larger. Rowan nodded, reaching for Sage's hand with the natural ease of someone who had learned that love was both recognition and daily choice. It's like watching a song learn to harmonize with itself, they explained, their voice carrying the quiet awe of someone witnessing daily miracles. Each act of kindness creates music with others, and that music calls more kindness into being. The whole village is becoming a symphony of silver, light. The friendship that had grown between them over the years had deepened into something that felt both inevitable and miraculous, two souls who had recognized each other across the crowded room of ordinary existence and chosen to build something beautiful together. Their love carried its own silver threads, but these were different from the ones Rowan witnessed in others. These threads flowed in both directions, creating loops of light that strengthened with each shared silence, each comfortable conversation, each moment of choosing to remain present to each other's mysteries. The proposal happened on a spring morning in Iris's impossible garden, as natural as breathing and twice as necessary. They were sharing breakfast among roses that bloomed in defiance of season when Sage looked up from buttering their toast and said, "With the gentle certainty of someone who had been thinking about this for months, I would like to marry you. If that sounds like a good idea to you too." Rowan felt their heart expand like a flower, opening to unexpected sunlight, the silver threads of their own capacity for love blazing so brightly that for a moment the entire garden seemed to pulse with luminous recognition. "Yes," they replied, understanding that this was not just personal joy but part of the larger pattern they had been learning to witness. Love finding its proper forms. Hearts choosing each other across the patient mathematics of tenderness made visible. Iris, who had been quietly tending her morning glories nearby, looked up with the satisfied smile of someone who had been expecting this conversation. "Well," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of accumulated wisdom, "I suppose we'll need to plan a wedding that honors both witness and celebration. Something that makes room for all the love that will want to attend." The ceremony took place in the impossible garden on a December afternoon when the first snow of winter fell like gentle blessings. The entire village gathered among roses that bloomed in defiance of cold, their presence creating a web of silver thread so complex and beautiful that Rowan had to close their eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the visible proof of how much love could gather in one place when people chose to celebrate each other's joy. Mrs. Chen brought wedding cake that tasted like captured starlight. Mr. Henderson delivered handwritten blessings from distant relatives, and the teenagers strung lights through the impossible roses, their young hands creating beauty that would outlast the ceremony itself. Each contribution created its own silver thread, weaving together into a tapestry of community celebration that transformed the wedding from private joy into shared affirmation of love's persistent courage. The vows they exchanged were simple but profound, acknowledging the weight they both carried, Sage as a keeper of stories that helped people feel less alone, Rowan as a witness to the daily heroism of hearts choosing kindness over convenience. They promised not just to love each other, but to continue their work of creating spaces where love could be honored, witnessed, celebrated in all its forms. As evening settled around them like a soft blanket, Rowan and Sage found themselves surrounded by the gentle glow of witnessed love in its most concentrated form. Their marriage had become not just union but sanctuary, a place where the silver threads of individual sacrifice could gather and be honored, where the weight of witnessed tenderness could be shared between two hearts strong enough to carry it together. The library's back room evolved to reflect this new partnership, becoming a space where people could bring not just their own burdens, but their gratitude for kindnesses received, their wonder at love's persistence, their questions about how to choose tenderness when fear felt safer. Together, they created conditions where the village's growing capacity for love could gather and strengthen, each witnessed sacrifice adding another thread to the beautiful tapestry that held their community together. On quiet evenings, when the impossible roses glowed in winter darkness and the air hummed with the frequency of love made visible, Rowan and Sage would sit together in their garden sanctuary, feeling the profound privilege of their shared work settling around them like a warm embrace. They were part of something larger than any individual life, a continuous story of love choosing to manifest as visible miracle, witnessed and honored and passed down through the patient alchemy of sacrifice, transformed into celebration. Two hearts learning to carry love's beautiful weight together, making it not lighter but infinitely more meaningful in its shared witness to the endless human story of choosing each other across darkness. The months that followed their wedding settled into a rhythm as gentle as morning light, touching familiar windows, each day deepening their understanding of what it meant to build a life together, while continuing to witness the silver mathematics of love that governed their village. Rowan and Sage moved through their shared days with the natural harmony of two instruments that had been waiting their whole lives to play the same song. Their routines structured around small rituals of attention, morning tea shared in comfortable silence, evening walks through streets that hummed with witnessed kindness, Nights spent reading stories that felt like conversations with distant friends. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as autumn painted the world in shades of burnished copper, and the impossible roses prepared for another winter of defiant blooming, that Sage woke with their hand pressed gently to their stomach, and wonder lighting their eyes like sunrise. "I think," they whispered, their voice carrying the careful hope of someone afraid to speak a dream too loudly. "I think we're going to have a baby." The news settled between them like a blessing learning to take physical form, and Rowan felt their awareness expand in ways they had never imagined possible. The silver threads that had always connected them to each other began to pulse with new frequency, and something else began to manifest, a tiny constellation of light that seemed to exist in the space between heartbeats, growing stronger with each passing day. As Sage's pregnancy progressed, the entire village seemed to respond with unconscious celebration. Mrs. Chen began leaving extra pastries on their doorstep, with notes that read, "For the growing family, her kindness," creating silver threads that connected not just to them, but to the new life preparing to join their community. The impossible garden responded with its own form of anticipation, blooming with even greater abundance, as if Iris's magic recognized the approach of someone new to cherish. Luna arrived on a night when the sky wept meteors, each falling star leaving trails of light that seemed to echo the silver threads Rowan had spent their life learning to witness. Her birth was timed with the same cosmic precision that had marked Rowan's own entrance into the world, as if the universe itself was taking note of another arrival, destined to carry love's work forward in new and necessary ways. The moment Luna drew her first breath, Rowan felt their gift transform in ways that left them breathless with wonder. Where once they had seen only the silver threads of witnessed love, now they could perceive something even more profound, the dark knots that formed when people carried regret for the times they had chosen, fear over kindness, and, more importantly, the way these knots could be gently untangled through patient understanding and forgiveness. Luna's eyes, when they opened, held starlight in ways that reminded Rowan of their own childhood, but where Rowan had been born to witness love's sacrifices, Luna seemed destined for something different. Even as an infant, she would calm immediately when held by someone struggling with guilt or regret, her tiny presence somehow offering comfort to hearts that had been carrying burdens too heavy for their own good. The realization of her gift came gradually, through gentle observation rather than dramatic revelation. As Luna grew from sleeping bundle to curious toddler, her unusual ability became more pronounced. She would reach toward people who were tangled in their own self-criticism, her small fingers seeming to trace patterns in the air that loosened the dark knots Rowan could see wound around their hearts. When Luna was barely 2, a carpenter came to their library sanctuary, hands stained with work he no longer loved, carrying the heavy knot of a harsh word he'd spoken to his son years ago. Luna toddled over and placed a paper star in his weathered palm. "For the part that hurts," she whispered, with the gravity of someone much older, and Rowan watched the dark tangle around his heart loosen like a held breath finally released. The man wept quietly, gratefully, and later began building small benches for the communal garden, each one carved with tiny stars. Iris watched these developments with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been expecting such miracles. "Each generation learns to carry love's work differently," she explained one afternoon as they sat together in the garden, Luna sleeping peacefully in her arms while silver threads and loosening knots created a complex symphony of light and shadow around them. Rowan witnesses the beauty of sacrifice. Luna heals the wounds that love sometimes leaves behind. Together, they create conditions where people can love more boldly. The family became a constellation of healing, each member offering a different kind of witness to the human heart's capacity for both love and redemption. Rowan continued to honor the silver threads of sacrifice. Sage created spaces where stories could help people feel less alone in their struggles, and Luna demonstrated an extraordinary ability to help people release the shame that prevented them from loving as freely as they longed to. The village responded to this new configuration of gifts with unconscious gratitude, people finding themselves more willing to risk kindness, more forgiving of their own imperfections, more open to the possibility that love could be both demanding and gentle. The silver threads multiplied and strengthened, while the dark knots of regret began to loosen more easily, creating an atmosphere where love could flourish in ways that had never before seemed possible. As winter settled around them and the impossible roses continued their defiant blooming, Rowan stood one evening at their cottage window, holding Luna while Sage prepared tea behind them. The baby's starlight eyes gazed up with the profound recognition that passes between souls who understand their work in the world, and Rowan felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had learned that love's mathematics included not just sacrifice, but forgiveness. Not just witness, but healing. Not just the courage to give, but the grace to receive what was offered with open, grateful hands. The 10th year of borrowed time began to draw toward its gentle close like evening light settling over familiar rooms, and Rowan could see in the translucent quality of the silver threads flowing from Iris's hands that their grandmother was preparing for the most profound transformation of all. The threads still blazed with devoted luminescence as they connected her to the impossible roses, but they carried now the ethereal beauty of morning mist preparing to lift, present and precious, and somehow already becoming part of something larger than individual existence. Iris moved through these final months with deliberate grace, teaching Luna the deeper mysteries of tending impossible things, with hands that understood love as active choice rather than passive feeling. Together they knelt in the rich earth that had been enriched by decades of witnessed sacrifice, and Iris showed her great-granddaughter how to distinguish between the seeds that would carry the garden's magic forward and those that had already given their essence to current blooms. This soil remembers every choice of love that has touched it, Iris explained, her weathered fingers guiding Luna's small hands through earth that felt warm even in winter's approach. Every tear of joy, every moment of choosing beauty over safety, every gentle sacrifice has become part of what feeds these impossible roses. When you tend them after I'm gone, you'll be tending not just plants, but the accumulated tenderness of everyone who ever chose to love despite the cost. Luna absorbed these lessons with the profound attention of someone recognizing ancient wisdom, her starlight eyes reflecting understanding that went deeper than words. Rowan watched the silver threads flow between grandmother and great-granddaughter, carrying not just instruction, but the very essence of what it meant to transform personal sacrifice into beauty that could nourish entire communities. The village began to sense the approaching transition, without anyone speaking of it directly, responding with the unconscious grace of a community that had learned to honor love in all its forms. Mrs. Chen arrived with bread still warm from the oven, staying to share tea and memories of how Iris's winter roses had helped her through the loneliest period of her widowhood. Mr. Henderson brought letters from distant friends who had heard about the impossible garden and wanted to send their gratitude for beauty that had traveled far beyond village boundaries. Even Sage, growing large with their second child, spent quiet afternoons documenting Iris's stories in careful handwriting, understanding that some wisdom could only be passed down through the patient alchemy of attention, transformed into memory. They created a gentle record not of facts but of feelings, preserving the emotional temperature of lessons learned through decades of choosing tenderness over self-protection. As autumn deepened and the impossible roses prepared for another winter of defiant blooming, Iris began speaking more openly about the approaching completion of her borrowed time. She did so without sadness or fear, but with the calm satisfaction of someone who had used their extra years exactly as intended, transforming them into beauty that would outlast any individual life. Death is not the opposite of love, she explained one evening as they sat together in the garden, Luna sleeping peacefully in Rowan's arms, while the unborn child stirred gently beneath Sage's protective hands. It's love's way of making room for new forms of itself. I have poured my life into these impossible blooms, and they will continue blooming long after my hands can no longer tend them, because love, once given freely, becomes part of the world's permanent conversation with possibility. In her final days, Luna demonstrated the full flowering of her healing gift, approaching Iris with the instinctive understanding of someone born to untangle the dark knots that even the most loving hearts sometimes carry. She placed a small paper star on her great-grandmother's chest and whispered, "For the part that still worries about giving too much, and Rowan watched the last small tangle of regret loosen like snow becoming water, leaving only silver threads flowing toward a horizon none of them feared. On the night when Iris's breathing became as gentle as autumn leaves settling onto still water, the entire family gathered in the impossible garden. Snow fell so softly it sounded like forgiveness landing, and the roses glowed with accumulated luminescence, as if the garden itself was preparing to receive its tender's final gift. Her last breath arrived like a petal opening, synchronized with the blooming of a single perfect rose that unfurled its petals in winter darkness, demonstrating that beauty, once freely given, becomes part of the world's permanent furniture. The silver threads that had flowed from her hands throughout the borrowed decade didn't disappear but transformed, becoming part of the garden's essential nature, ensuring that the impossible blooms would continue their defiant flowering as long as someone tended them with love rather than duty. The garden pulsed with deeper luminescence, understanding that its tender was not gone but transformed, becoming part of the eternal conversation between sacrifice and celebration, between the patience required to tend impossible things and the faith necessary to believe they will continue blooming long after our own hands can no longer guide their growth toward light. Luna scattered rose petals that caught the morning snow and held it like captured prayers, while Rowan and Sage stood together, feeling the profound privilege of having witnessed love's most essential. Mathematics, the way wisdom passed from one generation to the next through the simple act of choosing to share what had been, learned through a lifetime of choosing beauty over safety, tenderness over self-protection. The impossible roses continued their winter blooming, tended now by 3 generations who understood their profound secret, that love grows best in soil enriched by sacrifice, witnessed by patient attention, and healed by gentle understanding. The years that followed Iris's gentle departure unfolded like long, soft breaths, each season deepening the luminous web that now stretched across every corner of their village. Rowan's hair had silvered at the temples first, then along the crown, and with each passing season the lines at the corners of their eyes grew kinder, the way paper grows soft when handled by careful hands. They had become, without anyone declaring it, the village's unofficial keeper of loving memory, the person others sought when they needed someone to understand the true cost of their choices without judgment, or the weight of unwanted advice. People arrived at their cottage near the crossroads with thermoses of coffee or folded letters or nothing at all, finding Rowan in the impossible garden or the library's back room, ready to listen the way some people pray, quietly, reverently, as if each story were a living thing that deserved a warm seat and patient attention. The silver threads that had once been individual connections now formed an intricate tapestry of light that stretched across the entire village, connecting every home, every heart, creating a visible web of witnessed kindness that made the very air shimmer with accumulated tenderness. The family had grown into a living constellation of healing, each new member adding their own unique frequency to the symphony of love that governed their days. Sage gave birth to their second child during a spring thunderstorm that felt like applause, a son they named Cedar, who arrived with the particular gift of appearing exactly when someone needed gentle encouragement to choose the more generous path. Where Luna had been born to heal the wounds that love sometimes left behind, Cedar seemed destined to help people recognize the precise moments when choosing kindness would matter most. Luna, now approaching adolescence with starlight still caught in her eyes, had grown into her gift with remarkable grace. She moved through the village at dusk with a pouch of small painted stones and folded paper stars, stopping when someone's steps hesitated under the weight of old mistakes. She didn't always understand their words, but she understood their hearts, the way a bowed head carried shame, how a tight jaw held unspoken regret, how laughter could arrive too loudly to cover the ache of chances missed. "For the part that's ready to forgive," she would whisper, placing a smooth riverstone in waiting palms, and Rowan would watch the dark knots around hearts loosen like held breaths finally released. The village had transformed in ways both subtle and profound, becoming a place where love was not just felt but actively cultivated. Through the patient mathematics of daily choice, Mrs. Chen's practice of rounding down prices had evolved into a complex system of kindness that ensured no one ever went hungry, her bakery becoming a hub of quiet generosity where day-old bread appeared with notes reading, "For whoever needs sweetness today." Mr. Henderson's postal route had expanded to include regular visits to isolated elders, his extra miles creating silver threads that connected lonely hearts to the larger community of care. His letters now carrying small encouragements written in careful script. You matter. Keep going. Someone is thinking of you today. The communal garden had flourished beyond anyone's expectations, becoming not just a source of food, but a gathering place where neighbors shared seeds and stories, where children learned that growing things required patience and faith in equal measure. The benches carved by the carpenter, the same man who had once wept over harsh words spoken to his son, offered places of rest and reflection, each one decorated with tiny constellations that reminded visitors they were part of something larger than their individual sorrows. Even the teenagers had developed their own traditions of looking out for those who needed support, their young love learning to express itself through practical kindness that created luminous patterns in Rowan's expanded vision. Sarah Martinez continued bringing extra sandwiches to school, but now others had joined her quiet ministry, creating a network of care that ensured no child sat alone at lunch, no student struggled with homework without offers of help. The library's back room had evolved into something approaching a small chapel of witnessed love, where people came to share not just their burdens, but their gratitude for kindnesses received, their wonder at love's persistence, their questions about how to choose tenderness when fear felt safer. Sage had begun documenting these conversations in notebooks that always smelled faintly of rosemary, creating a gentle archive of human hearts, learning to love more boldly. A collection of stories that demonstrated the endless variations on the theme of choosing each other across darkness. On quiet evenings, when the impossible roses glowed in their winter defiance, and the air hummed with the frequency of love made visible, Rowan would sit in their favorite chair by the window, watching the silver threads pulse and dance throughout the village like a living symphony of connection. They had learned to read the complex patterns these threads created, understanding that each act of witnessed kindness strengthened the entire web, making it easier for others to choose love over convenience, generosity over self-protection. Visitors had begun arriving from neighboring towns, drawn by rumors of winter roses and a library where a lamp never went out. They would step into the back room, see dust motes drifting like patient galaxies in slanted light, and pause as if encountering a kindness they'd forgotten how to receive. Some came to talk, some came to be silent, all left different, carrying with them phrases Rowan had learned to offer like pocket stones. You have time. You're braver than the voice in your head. Let the soft thing be enough today. One evening, as autumn painted the world in shades of gentle farewell, and the first snow began to dust the impossible roses with crystalline blessings, Rowan stood at their cottage window and felt a familiar stirring beneath the cobblestones. Not urgency, but timing, the patient readiness of something significant preparing to unfold. The sensation never frightened them anymore. It felt like an old friend clearing his throat, like the universe preparing to offer another lesson in the beautiful mathematics of love, choosing to manifest in forms they had never imagined possible. The impossible roses continued their defiant blooming, tended by hands that understood their profound secret, that love grows best in soil enriched by sacrifice, witnessed by patient attention, healed by gentle understanding, and passed down through the eternal conversation between one generation's wisdom and the next's readiness to carry beauty forward into whatever tomorrow was preparing to reveal. In the gentle light of witnessed love made visible, the stirring beneath the cobblestones had grown into something that felt less like anticipation and more like quiet celebration, the way morning light settles over familiar rooms with the satisfaction of promises kept. Rowan felt no urgency as they watched the fifth road materialize at the crossroads, its crystalline stones drinking starlight until they glowed like captured dreams. The shop of necessary things breathed into being with the same gentle inevitability as seasons changing. But tonight its amber windows carried a warmer light, and the very air around it hummed with the frequency of completion rather than beginning. Mr. Necessary emerged from his doorway with steps that carried decades of accumulated satisfaction, his form more substantial now, less twilight and more dawn. When his eyes met Rowan's through the frost-painted window, the recognition that passed between them felt like the final note of a long symphony finding its perfect resolution. There was no weight of bargaining in his presence tonight, no careful negotiation of prices and possibilities. Instead, he radiated the quiet contentment of someone whose carefully planted seeds had grown into a forest more beautiful than he had dared imagine. "Good evening." "Rowan," he said, settling into the chair that had become his across so many years of important conversations. The tea that appeared between them smelled of winter roses and summer rain. Of all the seasons that had passed since that first desperate night when a 12-year-old child had asked the universe for help and received an answer that transformed desperation into privilege. "I have come not to offer another bargain, but to share a gift and to reveal the nature of what we accomplished together all those years ago." Rowan sat with the patient attention they had learned from decades of witnessing others' most precious choices, understanding that this moment was revelation rather than test, celebration rather than examination. The silver threads throughout the village pulsed with gentle luminescence beyond the window, creating a tapestry of connection that had grown stronger and more intricate with each passing year. "You believed," Mr. Necessary continued, his voice carrying the warmth of accumulated wisdom, "that you were accepting a burden when you chose to witness the silver mathematics of love. But the truth is more beautiful than that simple exchange. You were not taking on weight. You were agreeing to become part of love's own system of attention, the way the universe ensures that every choice to choose, tenderness over self-protection, matters in the vast conversation between individual hearts and infinite connection." The explanation unfolded like a flower, blooming in slow motion, each petal of understanding revealing deeper layers of meaning. Mr. Necessary was not the devil of old stories, nor even a supernatural merchant of impossible exchanges, but something far more essential, the personification of love's own commitment to ensuring that every sacrifice was witnessed, honored, held in the careful attention of someone capable of understanding its true value. "The silver threads you have spent your life witnessing," he explained, gesturing toward the window where the village sparkled with accumulated kindness, "are not metaphor but reality, the visible manifestation of love's actual architecture. Your gift was not to see something that wasn't there, but to perceive what was always present, the luminous infrastructure that holds the world together through the patient mathematics of hearts, choosing each other across darkness." He reached into his coat and withdrew a simple compass, its brass surface worn smooth by countless hands. But when Rowan looked closer, they saw that its needle pointed not toward magnetic north, but toward something warmer, more essential. It turned slowly toward wherever love was choosing to spend itself most generously. "This is not instruction," Mr. Necessary said, placing it gently in Rowan's palm. "It is relief. When the symphony of silver threads grows overwhelming, let this guide your attention toward where it can do the most good, without exhausting your capacity for wonder." The compass felt warm in Rowan's hands, pulsing gently with the same rhythm as the hum beneath the cobblestones, and they understood that this was not just a tool but a recognition, acknowledgement that their years of faithful witness had earned them the right to age gracefully without. Withdrawing from the work that made them whole, Sage appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the same resonance that had called Rowan into the night. They took in the scene without alarm, their book-scented presence adding warmth to the already gentle atmosphere. "We've made tea," Sage murmured with characteristic quiet grace. "Stay." And he did, the three of them sharing the comfortable silence of companions who understood that some conversations happened best in the spaces between words. Before taking his leave, Mr. Necessary touched the doorframe with the reverence of someone saying goodbye to an old friend. "Your lifetime of witness has created ripples that travel farther than you can imagine," he said, his words settling around them like a warm blanket. "Every sacrifice you honored, every silver thread you acknowledged, has strengthened the web that holds all hearts together. When your time comes to rest, you will not be asked to release anything you've carried, only to let it flow onward to others, ready to continue the beautiful work of making love visible." He stepped into the star-breathed night, and the shop's lights dimmed to the tenderness of embers. Present and patient and certain as a held hand, Rowan and Sage stood together at the threshold, the compass warm between them, feeling the profound satisfaction of work well done and love well witnessed, ready for whatever gentle transformation awaited in the patient mathematics of hearts choosing each other across the luminous darkness that made every act of tenderness feel like a small miracle worth celebrating. The impossible roses continued their winter blooming, and somewhere in the village, Luna scattered paper stars while Cedar appeared exactly where encouragement was needed most. The eternal conversation between witness and love, preparing to reveal its next beautiful chapter. The weeks that followed Mr. Necessary's final visit settled around Rowan like gentle twilight, each day deepening their understanding that the work of witnessing love had evolved from active practice into quiet presence. The compass rested warm in their pocket, its needle no longer urgently pointing toward crisis, but gently indicating where their attention might offer the most comfort. A letter that needed answering, a bench where someone's silence wanted company, a doorstep where a sandwich and an orange would arrive at precisely the right moment. Rowan's hair had become completely silver now, soft as captured moonlight, and their movements had grown deliberate in the way of someone who understood that each gesture was both ordinary and sacred. They spent their mornings in the impossible garden, watching Luna and Cedar tend the winter roses with the same devotion Iris had shown, their young hands learning the patient mathematics of coaxing beauty from willing soil. The silver threads throughout the village had multiplied until they formed a luminous sea of connection, stretching beyond the hills to territories Rowan could only imagine, carrying the architecture of witnessed love into distant hearts. The cottage near the crossroads had become a pilgrimage destination for souls seeking to understand their own capacity for tenderness. People arrived from distant places with stories of kindness witnessed and questions about how to carry love without breaking under its beautiful weight. Rowan would sit with them in the garden sanctuary. Offering the patient attention they had learned was itself a form of love, watching silver threads bloom between hearts as understanding passed like warm bread from hand to hand. Luna moved through the village now with the quiet grace of someone whose gift had deepened into artistry, her starlight eyes still seeking the hidden knots of regret, her gentle touch creating conditions where people could forgive themselves for the times they had chosen. Fear over kindness. Cedar, approaching adolescence with his grandmother's gift for appearing exactly when encouragement was needed most, had become the village's gentle guide toward more generous choices, his presence making courage feel inevitable rather than impossible. Sage continued documenting their shared story in notebooks that smelled of rosemary and patient attention, creating an archive of witnessed kindness that demonstrated love's endless variations. Their voices, woven together in evening readings, created tapestries of memory that reminded everyone present of every small triumph of the human heart, every gentle sacrifice that had built this luminous world. As autumn painted the world in shades of grateful farewell, Rowan felt a familiar stirring, not urgency but completion, like a song reaching its natural perfect resolution. The silver threads around them pulsed with extraordinary brightness, a final chorus of all the love they had witnessed, all the kindness they had honored across decades of faithful attention. They sat on their favorite bench, surrounded by family and impossible blooms, feeling the air thick with rose perfume and the gentle hum of connection. The compass grew still in their palm, its work complete. Rowan understood they were not ending but transforming, becoming part of the eternal thread that connected all loving hearts across time and space, their lifetime of witness strengthening the web that held the world together. Their final breath arrived like a soft sigh, synchronizing with the blooming of a single perfect rose, its petals unfurling in winter darkness as if to welcome them home. And somewhere in the village, a child was born with eyes that could see the invisible mathematics of love, ready to carry the beautiful burden of witnessing forward into tomorrow, understanding that love, once chosen, leaves lasting imprints on existence itself, shimmering promises whispered on the wind that holds us all. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay.